And more than half of U.S. citizens who supported Donald Trump for president in 2024 think the U.S. military should not get involved in the conflict between Iran and Israel. That is according to a new The Economist YouGov poll. According to the poll conducted between June 13 and 16, over 1,500 U.S. adult citizens were surveyed during this period. 60% of those polled saying that they do not support U.S. involvement in the hostilities, 16% saying they do support U.S. involvement, while another 24% saying they are unsure. Majorities of Democrats, Independents, Republicans oppose U.S. military intervention in Iran. 65% of Democrats, 53% of Republicans, 61% of Independents saying the U.S. should stay out of the conflict. Just 15% of Democrats, 23% of Republicans, 11% of Independents saying the U.S. should get involved. And when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, far more Americans say the U.S. should engage in negotiations than saying it should not. Majorities of both Democrats and Republicans agreeing the U.S. should pursue talks with Iran, even as uranium enrichment remains a major sticking point. Donald Trump has been clear that Iran should not be allowed to develop nuclear weapon capabilities. A decade ago, shortly after the U.S. and 5 other countries reached a deal with Iran over its nuclear program, a larger share of Americans opposed talks with Iran than today. Back in 2015, under then President Barack Obama, far more Republicans than Democrats were against negotiating with Iran.
Hold on.
Let's go straight across now to our correspondent, Susan Tehrani, with us on the broadcast. Susan, first up, what's the latest that you're gathering from the White House? What are we expecting?
Well, President Trump right now, despite everything that's happening geopolitically around the world, notably the Middle East, has something that's very near and dear to his heart taking place at the White House, and that is an installation of the American flag ceremony, 2 flagpoles to be exact. But this recent poll really indicates where American people stand, and it's hard to get the majority of Americans to agree on anything. But this YouGov poll that was just conducted, as you mentioned, it was conducted between June 13th to 16th. That would be last Friday, the initial day that Israel launched its strikes against Iran. What's very noteworthy is still across the board, 73% of Americans say that under no condition Iran should have a nuclear weapon. Of course, as you mentioned, 69% prefer negotiations. And there is a small minority who say across the board, again, the Republican, Democrat, and Independent, that say the United States should get involved militarily. What also was interesting in that poll I found was that, of course, the majority of Americans do support Israel over Iran, but that support doesn't necessarily translate into American boots on the ground for the sake of Israel. They talk about sharing intelligence, sanctions against Israel's enemies, and other forms of assistance, even assistance as far as military assistance to defend Israel. But again, no direct military involvement.
Right, Susan, but the fact remains that we've seen a string of these polls when it comes to America's involvement in different quarters. But that does not necessarily mean that this would actually dictate or in a way change what America's stance would be at this point. But it does give us a telling impression of what the sentiment on the ground really is at this point. What can we expect over the next few hours? Because as of now, of course, the big question remains on what Trump's next move will be, and the region remains on tenterhooks as a result.
Yeah, that's very valid, and that is a concern considering the fact that President Trump has been very vocal in front of the cameras in the last few days. However, after yesterday that he held that meeting with his National Security Council, President Trump has gone dark. He's gone silent. He has not talked about this conflict in any shape or form. There was kind of skirmishes between, whether or not Tulsi Gabbard is still part of Trump's inner circle. J.D. Vance put out a social media post on X saying that they are indeed on the same page and that they support Tulsi Gabbard. And somewhat, at least social media wise, they said that all is well in Trump's world. However, we are also hearing reports that not only President Trump is conflicted on the level of involvement he wants American troops in this war right now, but also, as his generals say, all options are on the table, which option he's going to take. But the next 24 hours to 48 hours is going to be extremely telling.
Indeed. Leaving it there. Thanks very much, Susan, for those updates.